Welcome. Oh my
What's
gosh, it's the
going
first
on?
episode, bro.
Man, pleasure to be with you, brother Kofi, man. I love these Saturday chats, my bro. What's
Uh,
happening?
oh man, living life to the fullest as usual, Carl. I'm excited today. This is a moment in history right now, right? We're starting our first live. We've been having these conversations for almost about a year now, right?
Yeah,
Between
man.
like talking about life, going to things, and I remember I recall a couple of weeks ago, we were just like, man, like we get into some deep stuff, some
Mhm.
real deep topics.
Yeah, man. It just felt like quite downright sinful to keep all that yumminess and all that goodness that we discuss in our private calls for ourselves. So we were like,
Mhm.
dude, let's just play around with opening it up to the rest of the universe and seeing if they find value out of some of the things that we're discussing, the books we read, the podcasts we listen to, just some of
Hmm.
the challenges we face as we're both working to, climb the mountain of our individual lives, man. So I'm looking forward to this conversation and seeing how it can bless those that might have the opportunity to be a fly on the wall today.
Oh yes. You're pulling soul strings right now, brother. So this is the bringing into the world of coffee hour with Carl and Kofi. So
Love that. By the way, ching ching. I do have a little bit of coffee.
yes.
I need a fill up, but that's okay. I'll pretend like it's full. They won't know. I guess they do now.
So, yeah, we love diving into books. We love sharing different comments, and we just thought you guys would truly appreciate some of the stuff that we just talk about, like on a weekly basis. Sharing points in our lives, sharing things that we've learned, the experiences we've had. Because, for you and me, Carl, this has been just something that we've created a bit of a ritual of. And as you said,
Right.
bring it down to the world. There are going to be so many people that are going to gain some value. So we dove into this book, The Courage to Be Disliked, recently.
Mm. Yep. 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 What a good one, right? I mean, just the title alone, The
Right?
Courage to Be Disliked. I'm not sure. So you're the one that recommended it to me, but by the way, you always have such great book recommendations. I think you need to publish a list someplace that people can kind of just peruse on
Mm.
at their leisure. But I think the thing that attracted me to want to actually like check it out was I am a recovering people pleaser.
Hmm.
My entire life I've fought so hard to seek approval. Actually I was working through this with my therapist the other day, and my earliest memory of seeking approval was when I met my great grandfather, whom I'm named after, Carl.
Mm.
Like I said, I'm Carl with a K for those of you that might not know, and I'm named after a guy that we called Pakal, and he's since passed, but he was like the head of his village, a village called Kumba in Cameroon, where my family is from. It's in Southwest Africa, and
Mm.
I
Hmm.
remember when he came to the United States for the first time, he was like such a presence, not a big guy, but such a presence. And
Yeah.
at the time, my parents used to, they were hustling, school, multiple jobs. So they would leave me with this babysitter that we called grandma. She would watch like seven of us kids.
Uh-huh.
And I remember like my grandpa and my parents coming to pick me up, and my grandpa like removed his hat. He had like this like
Hmm.
tribal hat, and I thought he was gonna put it on me, which would have been like such a huge opportunity, to feel
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
connected to the culture, to be quote
Yeah.
unquote knighted. And instead, he put it on one of my friends' heads, and my friend was like dancing and all excited to have the hat on. And dude, for me, like little 4-year old Carl was like so sad. It was like worse than being picked last for dodgeball at recess. It was
Mm.
like this dude that I had been so excited to meet and to get to know, that I'm named after, that I had so much of my identity wrapped in, just skipped over me. And I'll never forget, he looked at
Mm.
me. He was a stern dude. He looked at me. He was like, "You're not a real Kumba boy." And he pointed to my friend who had the hat on. He was like, "That's the real Kumba boy." And I was like crushed. And so I think that was a really pivotal time from my childhood where something in me shifted, and I was like, man, I got to do whatever I can to be in good spirits, good favor with
Mm,
people. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
so yeah, man, the courage to be disliked, that title, it resonates, man. And I'm curious to hear, maybe what what it was that caught your attention to want to pick it up.
Wow, wow, that was powerful. Thank you for sharing that, man.
Yeah.
And what I've found is that for a lot of us, we've often had these experiences of like, and they usually stem from some early patient childhood where we may feel some type of inadequacy or may feel like, some way in which we're lacking. For me, it actually started with my father. Like when I was growing up, um, it was actually surrounded around music. My family is extremely musical. A lot of people play instruments like the piano, a lot of people are guitarists, a lot of people are singers. So as a child growing up, like I just was never really gravitated towards any of it. My dad would try to sit me down for a little bit. I just wanted to like run around, play sports, be active. I just never
Yeah.
had the attention span to really sit down and learn the piano. That's what he was trying to teach me. And I remember at one time, like my cousin started learning the piano and he got like really, really good. Like he was able to just sit down and like just zone into it. And so like I would notice like whenever, after a few years, whenever like I'd be with my cousin hanging out, my dad would actually start paying attention more to my cousin, bringing more attention
Mhm.
to him, saying, "Hey, like, how can I help you out the piano?" I'd be sitting there like playing in the corner, wanting, asking my dad to like play with me and things like that. But he'd be paying attention to my cousin, trying to help him out with
Yeah.
his musical prowess. And so this started to create this feeling of like, wow, like I feel like because I didn't take the time to learn this skill, I'm now not good enough to receive attention from my dad.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I feel that, man, as you shared that, I have similar type experiences from my
Mm,
upbringing that just kind of make the heart swell up a little bit. Maybe the
yeah,
listeners can all
yeah,
relate
yeah.
to a time where you just felt overlooked. You felt not seen, not
Mm,
heard, not understood. And, what we got to realize is that these things, they create this callus within us that sets us on this path to now do whatever we can, right? To like
mm,
pierce through that callus. And
yeah.
oftentimes that can lead to self destructive behavior where
Mhm,
you're really acting out of turn. And what I mean by that is like you're putting yourself aside, your needs, your wants, your desires, and you're prioritizing, the needs, wants, and desires of things and or people external of yourself that
mhm.
puts you in a not so good situation. And I know that I've got several stories in my adult life that we can maybe
Oh,
get into at another time. But again, that's why I really like this book. And maybe we want to kind of like dive into the book a little bit, Kofi, for the listeners out there, that might be resonating and shaking their heads with some of the things that we've shared. I
yeah.
think one of the things that I really like about the book, and for those that haven't checked it out, it's a really cool story, right? It's like a story of like an older gentleman who's kind of like this wise sage,
Mhm,
and a story of like a young man who's got a lot of internal conflict with himself, and he believes that people are just kind of born unlucky, and that you really
mm,
can't do much to shift what it is you're born into, and you're just kind of like stuck, right? And it's kind of like a nice little story and narrative back and forth between the two. But it talks about this thing called Adlerian psychology, which is a principle that I think can help a lot of the listeners. And basically, Adlerian psychology says the past does not matter and humans can change their circumstances. So why don't we
yeah,
start there, bro? Why don't we
yeah,
start there and kind of tie it into some of the things that, were takeaways for us and that we're working on in our
yeah.
lives?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. So, just yeah, starting off right there, one of the biggest takeaways I had from this was the desire for recognition,
Yeah.
as we were talking about, and how that makes you unfree, right?
Yeah.
So there's this, and it's I love the way that they phrase in the book, but they talk about, to live one's life worried about how others look at you and living in that way that you're just constantly trying to like grant others people's wishes, it really creates this like life of, yeah, being unfree, this life of like kind of being chained up. because like
Yeah.
if we're constantly seeking to be recognized, what that really is that like we just don't want to be disliked by anyone. And I know like even, you talked a little bit about our stories and how initially we kind of started down this path of like people pleasing, but we then continued down this route and we're constantly trying to like just promote positive feelings. We just don't want to be disliked. Like we get into a workplace, we don't want people talking bad about us. We don't want someone to feel like, have a negative experience with us. So we then will like change our behaviors and stray away from our truth to satisfy these needs and desires of others. And I've done that so many times, in my life. And what I realized is that like I started getting to this point where I'm like, okay, I don't even really know what makes me happy.
Oh man, dude, preach, brother, preach. I used to call myself the world's greatest chameleon, and I used to wear it. I used
Yeah,
to wear it. I used to
yeah,
wear it like a badge of honor
yeah.
until I got to a place somewhere in like my mid 20s, and I was like, dude, I don't really know like who I am or what I want, what
Mm,
what makes me me. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of that too, dude. It goes back to this fear of rejection. It's like, man, if I don't say how I really feel, right? And I'll give a practical example, man. Like, I'm recently out of a relationship and it was a very beautiful relationship. It taught me so much. I was so
mhm.
grateful. You know, got to the point where I was engaged and was kind of marching on that path towards marriage, obviously, which is what comes
Yeah,
after engagement.
yeah, yeah.
And I just started realizing that, oh wow, like there is some fundamental things, around several different areas, but one of them that I'll share here is like faith and spirituality that, my old partner and I didn't necessarily see eye to eye on.
Mm,
And I was
mhm,
really conflicted for a while because of the fear of being rejected, like what will she think if I like open up about my faith? And it's
mm,
something that maybe she doesn't necessarily agree with. And that's no wrong, no harm, no foul to her. But like, will
mhm.
I be rejected? Right. And so I would just bottle up. I would just bottle up. And it got to the place where we were like months away from, exchanging nuptials. And I just was
Yeah.
like, I've got to say something, right? And so I had to, quite frankly, lean into the courage to be disliked, to come home and to like express myself in an authentic way. Because where I got to was like a place where I was standing in the mirror and I was like, man, what kind of person do you want to be? You want to be the person that just like puts up and shuts up and, maybe like drives himself off a cliff or worse because you just have all this bottle pent up anxiety and energy? Or you want to be the kind of person that loves themselves enough and quite frankly loves other people enough to stand by how you really feel, right? And what you really hold true to your heart. Understanding that you may fall out of favor with that person
Yeah.
and understanding that that's actually okay,
Mhm.
So I'm curious where a lot of the listeners are with this, but it's forever been the whole popularity story. Society tells you this is
Yeah.
the way that success looks like. These are the things that are admired, and I think a lot of us forsake ourselves, trying to, operate within those boxes. And I just really love how the book talks about self-determinism, and it talks about how we can actually find freedom if we can just create a little bit of space between societal pressures and what we really need to do for ourselves to find true joy and peace.
Yeah, wow. That's, man, so many great points there. And, just like thinking about that need or desire to like, be liked, right? Like the
Yeah.
reality is like the only way to be like liked by everyone is if you were to like constantly just like, you know, be loyal to every single person and ignore like your own desires, right? And living
Mm-hmm.
that way, like the reason I feel like the reason why we have this inherent desire to do that is because like we're like communal animals.
Yep.
We're always like we like if you look at how people have evolved, like we evolved to be part of a group or a community. And so whenever we do
Yeah.
something that like may slightly feel like we're being excluded from that community, or we take an action and now we're shunned. Like it is like it's a survival thing. We're like, man, like I'm in danger right now. And that's where a lot of these feelings stem from. And
Right.
but like following that path, we know for both like you and I, when we follow that path and follow our truth, like that's when we are oftentimes find more fulfillment
Mhm.
when we're doing something that we're like is true to us. And in that way, we truly become like leaders. Because I mean, I know when I was younger in my early 20s, like I can think of a time where I was just trying to please everyone. I was working, at a hospital, and whenever there needed to be someone that needed to work overtime, it was me, right? I was always a person like self-sacrificing in that regard. Oh, you need to pick up a shift here, you need to pick up a shift there. And like it almost did not matter what was going on in my personal life. I just had this constant need and desire to like make my managers, the people above me, just happy. I just wanted their approval.
Right. 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 And that will get you into a pinch.
Oh yeah, yeah,
It will get you into a pinch. And what
yeah.
people fail to realize is that if you're doing things that aren't really in alignment with what your
Hmm.
spirit feels called to do, you end up doing kind of a crappy job at that thing, anyways. Right. And
Yeah.
so you're actually not even like serving the person that you've committed to as best as you could,
Mm.
and so they're now at a slight, right? You're now at a slight with yourself because you're doing something that doesn't really feel good, and it's just no good, right? And so I'm so happy we're having this conversation, and I guess I'm curious to hear from you
Wow.
what insights you can offer the listeners
Yeah.
that might be resonating with what we're talking about right now
Mhm.
in terms of what they can begin to do to practice this idea of courage and how it
Yeah.
can lead to people just
Yeah.
not really
Yeah.
liking you, but how it can free you. Like what's that been like for you, bro? Like give us a story or give us a practical takeaway that will probably help some people
Yeah.
implement this today.
100%. So this is a revelation that I had recently. Oftentimes we think that if we think about, or we think the way we're supposed to go about life is like others and then ourselves, right? We think about others' desires and then ourselves. That's like the preconceived notion. And we
Yep.
think like, all right, if I think about myself first and then others, I'm being selfish. No, like the reality of what is selfish is like you thinking of yourself and only yourself.
Mm.
If you think about yourself first, filling your own cup up first so you can then pour from that cup into others, that is a life where you're living, one, fulfilling your own desires, so then you can then fulfill the desires of others. And it's said in another way, put your oxygen mask on first. Like egocentric living egocentric is not selfish. Like if you're living
Right.
in a way where you can satisfy your own desires first, that is not a selfish thing.
Mhm.
You only think about your desires. Yeah, that is selfish, but it's so important to think about, what are the things that you need? Say you're entering into a relationship, right? It's important to think what type of partner do you want, as well as what you're going to, give to that other partner, but also think about what are your needs and your values in that relationship. Because if those things aren't being met as you start a relationship, it's only a matter of time till that fact that you have this lack, and you have these desires that aren't being met, and then that creates a blockage, and that's going to end the relationship at some point. So living egocentrically, is not again a bad thing. Live in your truth and operate in this way where you can think about yourself first before you then think about others' desires, because that'll allow you to actually give from a place of abundance instead of a place of lack.
Yes. Man, one of my best friends out here, shout out to Trey Johnson. He said it to me so well on a podcast we did a number of years ago. And it's just always stuck with me. And he was like, he gave me this cup analogy. He was like,
Mm,
I can't pour it out of an empty cup. He
yeah.
goes, I need to take care of filling up my cup so
Hmm.
full that it will run over into other people's cups.
Yeah.
And I know we all love analogies. If you're anything like me, you love a good analogy. But if you're really like me, you always butcher them. But hopefully that helps the audience make a little bit more peace with what you're saying about
Mm.
being egocentric. Because I feel like that word ego even is like such like a negative word in
Mhm.
society. It's like, oh, look at this person and their ego. Like, who does he or her or she think he is or her? You know what I mean? And it's like,
Mhm. Yeah.
no, man, like that person. I mean, don't get me wrong. There can be definitely, negative instances of ego, taking over and running one's head to the moon, right? In a not so good way. But with what you're saying is like, hey, prioritize your holistic wellness, right? And I define
Mhm.
holistic wellness as like, your mental health, your physical health, your
Mhm.
financial
Absolutely.
health, your interpersonal health, so that you can give freely, right? And you're not beholden to worrying about yourself or coming from, like I said earlier, from like a position of lack to where you're not doing yourself or the other person any
Yeah.
favors.
Yeah. So I want to, just give you guys one more tip before we switch gears a little bit here.
Sure.
But one thing that I do to help really prioritize myself is the first, I'd say, just about 2 hours of the day, I'm just focusing on myself. I am not answering text messages. I'm not answering emails. I wake up at around 5 a.m. and between 5 and 7, I'm going through my meditation. I'm hitting the gym, maybe reading a little bit, but doing all the things that I want to do so I can fill myself up so that I can give from a place of abundance throughout the rest of the day. So
Mm,
I'd recommend to our listeners, start the day out focusing on you, an hour or two just to be with yourself.
I love that, man. Kofi's part of that 5 a.m. club, I see.
Right? And then like,
Well, I love it. I love that you talk about that because it kind of segues very nicely into the next topic that I would like for us to spend a little bit of time on.
mhm.
And the book goes very narrow and deep onto this, and that's this topic of self-acceptance, right?
Mm,
And how one can really start to identify, right? Because a lot of us don't even know like who we really are, but
yeah.
beyond identify, like embrace our unique qualities versus just kind of waiting with whichever direction the wind pushes us in.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? And that's where that time in the morning, I do a very similar thing. I'm up by 4:30, hit the workout, spend time with God, meditate. But like that's where that quiet time is so, so, so critical because many of us jump out of bed and we're immediately like in fight or flight and we're just like responding to the day, right? We're responding to negative news or the demands that come through emails and texts and so on and so forth that we never really find downtime to just sit and think. And I
Mm,
think I think for a lot of people it's quite frankly a fear,
yeah.
like what's gonna come up if I just sit in silence, right?
Mm,
What feelings of inadequacy, what feelings of self-doubt, whatever. These negative things that we're all concerned about. And for me, I've always struggled with self-doubt up until recently where I've really like gotten a little bit more firmer and planted in my faith. Like my faith is a really, really big um, mobilizer, to helping me really live in my I am. But I want to help people understand that like feelings of inadequacy, feelings of self-doubt, like those
yeah.
don't actually come from who you are. What we have to realize is that we're all living with so many years of subliminal programming from our
Mm,
environment, from society, from the educational system, all of these things that are external of you and that like don't really truly take into account who you are. And so what I've begun to realize in my therapy has been really helpful is that like when I feel these emotions, like for instance, I just did a live event out here, my first one ever in Denver, and it was really, really awesome. It was like a dream come true. But I've been to so many of these live events over the years as I've been trying to figure things out, right? And
yeah.
I've looked at all these speakers and I've like compared myself to them. And
Mm-hmm.
I felt inadequate because I'm like, man, like, I don't know that I could, deliver a talk like that without fumbling. Like, I don't know if I could tell stories like that person that are as captivating. And what ends up happening is like you're taking all these external inputs, right? And you're using that as your measuring stick. And you're creating all of this anxiety about not being able to live up to somebody else,
Mm,
failing to realize that you have everything that you need within to
yeah.
show up and be a light in your own right that the world needs. Like the world does not need another Carl Sona. The world does not need another Kofi Thompson. Like the world needs you to spend
Mm-hmm.
time with yourself, to embrace what makes you the goat of your lane, what
Yeah.
makes you the Xerox copy, so to speak, that can deliver a message or do the thing or whatever it is that you're aspiring to do in your own right. And so when these feelings of self-doubt and like anxiety come up, I encourage people to like pause, do a box breath. I love doing box breaths. It's like basically where like you breathe in for 4, you hold at the top for 4, you release for 4, and then you hold at the bottom for 4. And what that's done for me is it actually creates space for me to
Mm-hmm.
go, oh, this feeling, this emotion, that's just from years of conditioning,
Yeah.
right? It's just from years of society telling me it needs to look this way or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when you can put that aside and label that what it actually is, you can embrace who you are and move on about whatever the thing is that you're getting ready to step into. And so for me with that live event, it was doing that technique I just shared and saying, hey, good for all those people I've watched. I don't need to be them. I need
Yeah.
to be me, and I need to focus on, for me, I'm a faithful guy, like what God is trying to like do through me to help these people. And that's the other thing too, like
Mm,
coming at it from a place of service where it's not about
yeah.
you, it's not the negative position of ego, but it's more about what people need, in the context of giving a talk, which a lot of people are afraid to do, right, in front of
Yeah.
people, like creates so much more freedom to flow. And I can't express how magnificent of a feeling it is when you can start to like walk into these spaces and be comfortable with who you are. So to wrap it up, I think it takes some time with oneself, hence, the early mornings or even throughout your day or before night to just kind of like take inventory on where you are and maybe where you're wanting to go. And then I think it takes some self-awareness, to label something that is societal conditioning versus you. And then I think it just takes, coming at it from a place of how can I be of service to really get people to kind of mobilize into being comfortable in their skin.
Yeah. Wow, man. I love that. I love there's so many things that I think that are really valuable there. Like, there's a great quote like comparison is a thief of joy, right? And when we are constantly in a space where we are comparing ourselves to others, we are going to be like, you know, creating those feelings of low self-esteem, low self-confidence, and all that
Yeah.
stuff continues to cultivate.
Mhm.
All that stuff really continues to cultivate into us feeling some sort of, lack now because of that. And
Yeah.
then you're really thinking about that, like when your heart's on service, you're never nervous.
Oh yeah. 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 I love that.
Right. That is so true, right? Like I feel like, anytime I've been able to, say I'm, talking with a client or say like, I'm interacting with a friend, if I'm worrying about like how I sound, how I feel, or like my own knowledge in the moment, like that is going to create all sorts of feelings of like just like, lack because we are again focusing internally
Yeah.
instead of like kind of being present and focusing on that thing right in front of us. So if you're talking to a friend, you're saying, all right, like how can I just spend this time just listening to them, seeing what ways I may be able to help and support them out. It's like impossible to feel like self-confident or having a lack of self-confidence in that moment or feeling low self-esteem because you're really saying, all right, like I'm going, and the effect of that is you also bring out your own superpowers as well too. So I think that's such a beautiful thing because you start realizing,
Yeah.
wow, I am a good listener, or like, wow, like this person told me this and I was able to help them figure out. And
Yeah.
like the reinforcement of like serving others allows you to see the uniqueness of yourself as well too, which is like
Mm,
I think it's just such a cool dynamic.
yeah.
So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, bro. Everybody has a superpower, man.
Yeah.
Everybody is put here to do something incredible in their own right. And the Bible talks a lot about this, and it makes so much sense. Like our body has so many different parts. Like
Yeah.
we have fingers and you got eyes and nose, and they all have different yet critical functions that help us exist and navigate this life in a safe manner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to look at someone that's an arm or a hand, right, and you're an eye, and say, I want to be this hand. Well, like who's going to be the eye that helps that
Yeah.
that helps that
Yeah.
helps the
Yeah.
overall body function and move towards you know I don't know, a place of safety or a goal, whatever. I think you guys kind of understand where I'm going. Again, I'm the king of butchering analogies, but
Yeah.
it's all about recognizing that what makes someone great is great for them, right? But
Yeah.
that might be different for you, and that's
Mhm.
great for you. And I just think so many people get caught, and I used to be there, just get
Yeah.
caught in this, I want to look like this person, I want to sound like this person. And it's like, you're really just ignoring all the gifts that live within you. You
Yeah.
really are. And so I'd really love to just, have more of these conversations, bro, so we can get people thinking about what if it was a different way, and that way being
Yeah.
like, what if you actually had everything within you that you needed
Mhm.
to just
Mhm.
shine? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? What if you weren't actually missing anything? What if you had all the seeds of greatness within that just need a little bit more of your attention and your focus so that they can be cultivated, so that they can grow, so that they can help and provide value to the people and the spaces that you're intended to provide value to. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So that's what I want to leave people with, man. What do you want to leave folks with? I mean, this is just our first of many. We're going to be breaking down this book probably a little bit more for all of y'all that are listening. We welcome any questions. Um, but Kofi, what do you want to leave people with, man, on part one of our conversation today?
Yeah, man, I would just love to leave people with, really like spending time with yourself, like getting to know like who you are, because we all have this uniqueness about ourselves, something that makes us truly amazing. Again, it could be like a skill in like a certain area. It could be your ability to listen. It could be, your ability to be present in a situation. But until we actually spend that time with ourselves, we're never going to truly get to know, what that is. And then that creates this feeling that we're constantly trying to look outside in a way to change ourselves to be great. But we all have again this uniqueness. So I would encourage our listeners just to, maybe start off with 4 or 5 minutes a day, just like journaling, and meditation, like taking a walk and just doing something on your own, just being present. And as you continue to do that and reinforce that familiarity with yourself, you're gonna start realizing amazing things. So, man, take that time for yourself. This has been an absolutely awesome experience, man. And yeah, Kofi and Karl coffee hour. I
Yes,
love
yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one. And till then, lean into the courage to be disliked. You might just surprise yourself in the world at large. And if you do this, if you're willing to take us up on this challenge, we welcome, feedback from you in terms of what you learned or what you experienced. Much love, everybody.
it.